The words spoken in a hushed, irritated tone from the other room were not meant for her. They were a stray bullet, fired carelessly during a late-night business call, but they found their mark in the center of her heart. She's just dead weight right now, Mark. I love her. But with the baby and the hormones, she's a liability when I need to be focused. Dead weight. The two words echoed in the silent, cavernous space of their multi-million-dollar home, instantly turning the gilded cage into a cold, barren prison. And in that moment, something inside Elena fractured, not to break, but to finally break free. The scent of rosemary and roasted garlic filled the air, a carefully curated aroma of domestic bliss. Elena, 7 months pregnant, moved with a slow, deliberate grace through the state-of-the-art kitchen, a space so sleek and minimalist it felt more like a showroom than the heart of a home. She adjusted the organic microgreens on a platter of wild-caught salmon, her reflection shimmering back at her from the polished chrome of the Sub-Zero refrigerator. The woman in the reflection was the picture of success, or rather the picture of a successful man's wife. Her silk maternity blouse flowed over the gentle curve of her stomach, her hair was a cascade of honey blonde waves, and on her finger, a diamond flashed with cold, brilliant fire. It was all perfect. A perfect home, a perfect meal, for a perfect life with her perfect husband. Liam was the architect of this perfection. He was a titan of the tech industry, the celebrated CEO of Innovate Inc., a man whose ambition burned so brightly it cast everyone else in shadow. When they met, she had been a freelance art curator, full of passion for discovering obscure artists and telling their stories. He had found her charming, a beautiful, cultured accessory to his burgeoning empire. He'd swept her off her feet with a ferocity that felt like love, and she had willingly stepped into the life he built for her, her own ambitions quietly packed away, like old canvases in an attic. She told herself she was happy. She told herself this life of charity luncheons and interior decorating was fulfilling. The baby, their son, would be the final, perfect piece. The sound of the front door clicking open broke the spell. Liam was home, 2 hours later than he'd promised, as usual. She smoothed her blouse over her belly and went to greet him, a practiced smile already gracing her lips. He strode into the foyer, shrugging off his tailored Italian coat, his phone already pressed to his ear. He didn't look at her, instead offering a cursory peck on her cheek as he passed, his eyes locked on the sleek device in his hand. No, Mark, that's unacceptable. The valuation depends on the acquisition of the patent. Push them harder, he barked into the phone. Elena's smile faltered for a fraction of a second before she restored it. Welcome home, honey. I made the salmon you like. He waved a dismissive hand, still deep in his call. Give me 5 minutes. He disappeared into his home office, the heavy oak door closing with a definitive thud that seemed to suck the warmth from the hallway. 5 minutes, she knew from experience, could stretch into an hour or two. The perfectly cooked salmon would grow cold. The microgreens would wilt. Her efforts would become another unnoticed, unappreciated detail in the grand tapestry of his success. She retreated to the kitchen, the silence now feeling heavy and oppressive. It was in these moments of waiting that the cracks in their porcelain life became visible. It was in the casual cancellations of dinner plans, the forgotten anniversaries, the way his eyes would glaze over when she spoke of her day. He wasn't cruel, not in the overt, Hollywood sense of the word. His neglect was a softer, more insidious thing, the byproduct of a mind that had no room for anything but the next deal, the next quarter, the next victory. She was a part of his portfolio, a beautiful asset he was proud to own, but one that required little day-to-day management. Her own past was a gallery of ghosts she rarely visited. She was the daughter of a man much like Liam, a brilliant, ruthless businessman who had soared to incredible heights before crashing into a spectacular, public bankruptcy. Her father, Richard, had taught her that in the world of men who build empires, emotion was a weakness and dependency a sin. He had adored her as a child, his precious jewel. But when his fortune vanished, so did his affection, replaced by a bitter resentment for the family he could no longer support. He saw her mother's quiet strength as passivity and Elena's artistic sensibilities as frivolous. You need a man to take care of you, Ellie, he had told her, his voice hollowed out by failure. You don't have the stomach for the real world. She had believed him. She had sought out in Liam the strength and security her father had lost, mistaking his ambition for a shield that would protect her. Now, standing in the cold, silent kitchen, she felt the familiar chill of her father's words. She was being taken care of, cocooned in luxury. So why did it feel so much like being erased? An hour later, Liam finally emerged. He had changed into a cashmere sweater and dark jeans. Looking refreshed, the tension of his call washed away. He smiled at her, a genuine, charming smile that could still make her heart flutter. Sorry about that, darling. Crisis averted. Now I'm starving. What's this? He gestured to the now tepid salmon. I made your favorite, she said, her voice softer than she intended. It looks wonderful, he said, kissing her forehead. He sat at the enormous marble island and began to eat, scrolling through emails on his phone between bites. He complimented the food absently, his mind clearly still in his office. He asked no questions about her day, her doctor's appointment, or the baby. He talked at length about the patent dispute, about Mark's incompetence, about the pressure he was under from the board. Elena listened, nodding, making the appropriate sounds of support. She was a sounding board, a decorative fixture in the room where he downloaded the stresses of his day. Later that night, as she lay in their king-size bed, the chasm between them felt miles wide. Liam was already asleep, his breathing deep and even, his corporate battles won for the day. She placed a hand on her belly, feeling the gentle flutter of her son. A fierce, protective love surged through her, so potent it was almost painful. This tiny life, this part of her, deserved more than a life in the shadows of a great man. He deserved a mother who was whole, not just a beautiful, well-kept fragment. The thought was a dangerous spark in the tinderbox of her growing discontent. She had built her identity around Liam, letting his world become hers. But as she drifted into a restless sleep, she couldn't escape the terrifying question. If Liam was the architect of her life, what would be left if he ever decided to tear it all down? The breaking point didn't arrive with a thunderous crash, but with a quiet, venomous whisper. It was a Tuesday night, barely a week after the incident with the cold salmon. A storm raged outside, mirroring the tempest brewing within the sterile walls of their home. Liam had been on edge for days, the patent deal teetering on a knife's edge. He paced the length of their living room, a caged tiger in a bespoke suit, his phone practically fused to his ear. Elena sat curled on the sofa, feigning interest in a novel, the words blurring on the page. She had learned to make herself small and silent during these high-stakes periods, to become part of the furniture. He had been speaking to Mark, his business partner and COO, for over an hour. His voice, usually so commanding, was strained with a rare thread of desperation. Elena tried to block it out, focusing on the rhythmic drumming of rain against the floor-to-ceiling windows. But then, the tone of the conversation shifted. Liam's voice dropped, becoming conspiratorial, weary. I just need to close this, Mark. The pressure is immense. The board, the investors, they're watching every move. A pause. Elena could faintly hear the tinny murmur of Mark's voice on the other end. Then came Liam's reply, the words that would replay in her mind for months to come. A poison-tipped arrow finding its target with chilling precision. And things at home, it's not helping, Liam sighed, the sound heavy with self-pity. Elena means well, but she doesn't get it. The nesting, the constant questions, the moods. Honestly, it's a distraction I can't afford. She's just dead weight right now, Mark. I love her, of course, but with the baby and the hormones, she's a liability when I need to be focused. Another mouth to feed, another thing to worry about. Dead weight. The book slipped from Elena's numb fingers, landing silently on the plush rug. The air in her lungs turned to ice. It wasn't just the insult, it was the casual, dismissive way he said it. As if he were discussing a poorly performing stock, a line item on a budget that was draining resources. A liability, not his wife, not the mother of his child, but a problem to be managed. Every moment of his recent distance, every forgotten promise, every distracted kiss suddenly coalesced into this one, brutal truth. This is what he saw when he looked at her. The memory of her father slammed into her with the force of a physical blow. She was suddenly 16 again, standing in the cold, half-empty shell of their once magnificent home as the bankruptcy lawyers picked over the remnants of their lives. Her father, Richard, a man broken by his own hubris, had turned on her mother. "If I hadn't had you two weighing me down," he had spat, his voice thick with scotch and failure, "I could have been nimble. I could have recovered. You were an anchor when I needed to be a speedboat." He had looked at Elena then, his eyes cold and assessing. "Don't you ever be an anchor, Ellie. Men like me, we can't afford them." She had spent her entire adult life trying not to be an anchor. She had been the supportive girlfriend, the charming fiancée, the perfect, undemanding wife. She had meticulously managed their home, their social life, his public image, all while suppressing her own desires, her own voice. She had done everything to be a sail, not an anchor, for Liam's speedboat. And for all her efforts, she had ended up in the exact same place, dead weight. Liam ended the call and turned to her, forcing a smile that didn't reach his tired eyes. "Deal's on life support," he said, running a hand through his hair. "Mark is dropping the ball." He seemed to notice her expression for the first time, the frozen shock on her face. "What's wrong with you? You look like you've seen a ghost." The ghost of her father, she thought. The ghost of her own foolishness. She couldn't find her voice. What was there to say? To confront him would lead to a fight, to his apologies wrapped in excuses about stress and pressure. He would tell her he didn't mean it, that he loved her. But she had heard the truth in his tone, the weary, honest admission to his friend. That was the real Liam. The rest was performance. "I'm just tired," she finally managed to say, her voice a hollow whisper. She pushed herself up from the sofa, each movement an effort. She felt the weight of her belly, the weight of their child, the weight of her husband's contempt. "I think I'm going to go to bed." She walked past him without looking at his face, afraid that if she did, the carefully constructed dam of her composure would shatter. In their bedroom, she closed the door and leaned against it, her body trembling. The tears finally came, silent and hot, not for his cruelty, but for her own naivety. She had willingly placed her life, her security, and her self-worth into the hands of a man who saw her as a burden. Her father's greatest fear for her had come true. But as the tears subsided, something else began to crystallize in their place. A cold, hard resolve. Grief was a luxury, a passive emotion. She could not afford it. Her father had crumbled under the weight of his failure, lashing out at those he was supposed to protect. She would not make the same mistake. She had a child to think of, a son who would learn about strength and worth from her. She would not let him see his mother as a victim, a fragile piece of porcelain to be kept on a shelf. She looked at her reflection in the large ornate mirror opposite the bed. The woman staring back was no longer just Liam's wife. The illusion had been stripped away. She saw the fear in her eyes, but beneath it, there was a flicker of something else, something she hadn't seen in years. It was the embers of the girl who had once loved art, the girl who had a fire in her belly for stories and truth. That girl had been buried, but she wasn't dead. Liam thought she was deadweight. He thought she was a liability. He was about to find out just how wrong he was. She didn't know how, and she didn't know what she was looking for, but she knew one thing with absolute certainty. She would never be anyone's anchor again. She would be the whole damn ship. The days that followed were a masterclass in deception. Elena played the part of the devoted, slightly hormonal pregnant wife with an Oscar-worthy performance. She made Liam's favorite breakfast, asked about his work with a manufactured interest, and endured his distracted kisses with a placid smile. On the surface, nothing had changed, but beneath the calm facade, a quiet revolution was beginning. Her grief had cooled into a diamond-hard clarity. The love and trust she'd had for her husband were gone, replaced by a chilling sense of purpose. She was no longer a passenger in her own life. She was a detective, and her husband's world was her crime scene. Her first move was to call Arthur Vance. Arthur had been her father's lawyer, a kind, silver-haired man who had shown her more genuine compassion during the bankruptcy than her own father had. He was old school, a man of integrity and discretion who had since retired from his high-powered firm to run a small private practice. He was the only person she knew whom she could trust implicitly. "Elena, my dear, what a surprise," he'd said, his voice warm and familiar over the phone. "How are you? I heard the wonderful news about the baby." I'm well, Arthur, thank you, she replied, her voice steady. Listen, I know this is out of the blue, but I was hoping you could help me with something. A personal matter. They met 2 days later in a quiet cafe in a part of the city Liam never frequented. Arthur's gentle eyes were filled with concern as he took in her appearance. He saw past the expensive maternity dress to the new, hard line of her jaw. This isn't just about a will, is it, my dear? He asked softly after she'd given him a vague story about wanting to get her own affairs in order before the baby arrived. Elena took a deep breath. No, it's not. She hesitated, then the words tumbled out. Not the story about Liam's cruel comment. That was a private hurt she wasn't ready to share, but the fear it had ignited. Arthur, when everything fell apart, it was all such a mess. He told me there was nothing left, absolutely nothing. But I was so young, I just took his word for it. Now with a child on the way, I need to know for sure. I need to know if there is anything, even the smallest trust or policy, left from my mother's side of the family. I need to know that I have something that is truly mine. The plea was genuine. The fear of being left with nothing, just as her mother had been, was a real and paralyzing terror. It was a fear born from her father's failure and watered by Liam's contempt. Arthur's expression softened with understanding. Of course, Elena. It's the smart and responsible thing to do. Your mother's family was quite astute. It's entirely possible your father, in his distress, overlooked something, or perhaps didn't want you to know about it. Let me do some digging. It may take some time, but I'll be thorough. For the next 2 weeks, Elena lived a double life. By day, she was the serene, nesting mother-to-be. By night, when Liam was asleep or working late, she was online, falling down rabbit holes of financial articles and corporate law, trying to understand the world Liam inhabited. She learned about venture capital, seed funding, and shareholder equity. She looked up Innovate Inc.'s corporate structure, a publicly traded company with a board of directors. Liam was the CEO and a significant shareholder, but he wasn't the founder. The company had been started a decade ago by 2 brilliant coders who had cashed out a few years after Liam was brought in to commercialize their vision. She read every article ever published about her husband, studying his career trajectory, his celebrated wins, his ruthless tactics. She was arming herself with knowledge, though she still didn't know what war she was preparing for. Then Arthur called, "Elena, I have something. It's unusual. Can you meet me tomorrow?" The air in the cafe the next day was thick with anticipation. Arthur laid a thin, leather-bound file on the table between them. He looked pale, his usual calm demeanor replaced by a sort of stunned reverence. "After I exhausted the usual channels," he began, his voice low, "I remembered your father had a fondness for a very particular, very discreet private bank in Switzerland. It was a long shot, but I still had a contact there. It took some doing, but I managed to unseal the records connected to your family." He paused, looking at her intently. "Elena, your father told you he lost everything. That wasn't entirely true." He opened the file. Inside were documents filled with dense legal and financial jargon. Arthur translated. "It seems that in the final weeks before he declared bankruptcy, your father did something remarkable. He liquidated a hidden, last-ditch asset, a portfolio of rare art he had kept off the books, and instead of trying to save his own failing company, he funneled the entire amount, a little over $20 million, into a single, high-risk investment." Elena's heart pounded against her ribs. $20 million? The number was incomprehensible. "He placed the investment inside a blind trust," Arthur continued, his voice barely a whisper. "The beneficiary of that trust is you. It was structured to remain dormant, managed by the bank, until one of 2 conditions was met: your 30th birthday or the birth of your first child. The trigger date is in 2 months when your son is due." Elena stared at him, speechless. A trust? A secret fortune? It didn't make sense. Her father had been a broken man. Why would he do this? And why hide it? "But what was the investment?" she finally asked, her voice trembling. This was it. This was the moment Arthur's professional composure seemed to shatter completely. He looked at her not as a client, but as a harbinger of a reality-altering storm. He pushed a single sheet of paper across the table. He invested it all in a fledgling tech startup, a company he believed had the potential to change the world. He saw something in their vision, in their aggressive new CEO. He bought a controlling interest, 55% of the company, as their primary angel investor. Elena looked down at the paper. It was a stock certificate dated 9 years ago. At the top, in bold, elegant letters, was the name of the company. Innovate Inc. The world tilted on its axis. The hum of the cafe, the scent of coffee, the feeling of the plush velvet chair beneath her. It all faded into a dull, distant roar. Her mind struggled to connect the dots. The company Liam had built his entire identity on, the empire he lorded over her, the source of his power in her gilded cage. She owned it. She had owned it all along. My God, she breathed, her hand flying to her mouth. Liam's words echoed in her ears, laced with a new, searing irony. Deadweight, a liability. He had no idea. The man who saw her as a drain on his resources was, in fact, her employee. Her entire life, the perfect house, the expensive clothes, the luxurious vacations, it had all been paid for with her own money, a secret legacy from the father who had pretended to abandon her. Arthur watched her, his expression a mixture of awe and profound pity. He didn't tell you, I suspect, because he was ashamed, he said gently. Ashamed of his failure, but also ashamed of his lack of faith in you. This was his penance, his one final desperate act to provide for you in the only way he knew how. He couldn't give you his love or his respect, Elena, so he gave you power. Power. The word hung in the air, potent and terrifying. For years she had felt powerless. Now she held the fate of her husband, his career, his entire world in the palm of her hand. A seed of doubt, planted in a moment of pain, had just bloomed into a terrible, beautiful, and earth-shattering truth. The drive home was a blur. Elena's hands were steady on the steering wheel of her Range Rover, a stark contrast to the chaotic symphony of emotions raging within her. Shock was the lead instrument, a piercing, high-pitched note that drowned out everything else. But beneath it, other feelings fought for dominance. A disorienting wave of grief for the father she had never truly known, a surge of vindication and that was sharp and sweet, and a cold, terrifying dread about what came next. She was the ghost in Liam's machine, the invisible force that had bankrolled his entire ascent. When she walked through the front door, the house felt different. The towering ceilings, the minimalist furniture, the curated art on the walls. It no longer felt like Liam's house that she simply lived in. It felt like hers. A profound tectonic shift had occurred in her perception of reality. She was not a guest in this life. She was its silent, unknowing benefactor. That evening, she observed Liam with a new, unnerving detachment. He came home, irritable and exhausted, throwing his briefcase onto a chair with a frustrated sigh. The patent deal was still in jeopardy, and his mood was thunderous. He complained about the board, about the incompetence of his legal team, about the vultures in the media who were starting to circle. They just don't see the long-term vision, he ranted, pouring himself a generous measure of whiskey. This deal will secure our market position for the next decade, but all they care about is the short-term risk. In the past, Elena would have soothed him, her voice a gentle balm on his ego. She would have told him he was brilliant, that they were fools for not seeing his genius. Tonight, she said nothing. She simply watched him, her head tilted slightly, a forensic observer studying a fascinating, infuriating specimen. She saw not a titan of industry, but a man terrified of losing, a man whose confidence was a suit of armor, hiding a fragile, desperate need for validation. And she realized with a startling pang of clarity that his ambition wasn't just about building something, it was about running away from the fear of being a failure, the same fear that had destroyed her father. Are you even listening to me? He snapped, noticing her silence. Yes, Liam, every word, she said, her voice eerily calm. It sounds very stressful. Her placid response seemed to unsettle him more than an argument would have. He stared at her, a flicker of confusion in his eyes before turning back to his drink. He had no idea he was ranting to his boss. The sheer, staggering irony of it was almost too much to bear. In the following days, Elena worked in secret with Arthur, poring over the documents from the Swiss trust. Arthur, energized by the case of a lifetime, became her trusted advisor, her wartime consigliere. He explained the intricate legal structure her father had created. The shares were held by a shell corporation, which was in turn owned by the trust. The trust was managed by a stoic, unshakable Swiss banker named Mr. Dubois, who had been given one simple instruction: vote in accordance with the sitting CEO's recommendations on all matters, unless the beneficiary, once activated, instructed otherwise. For 9 years, her power had been on autopilot, rubber stamping Liam's every move. Her father had given her the gun, but had kept the safety on, ensuring Liam could build the company without interference. He had gambled on Liam's ambition to grow the value of his daughter's inheritance, and the gamble had paid off spectacularly. Innovate Inc. was now worth billions. Your father was a complicated man, Elena, Arthur said during one of their meetings in his dusty, book-lined office. He belittled you, told you that you weren't suited for this world. But this trust, this is the most profound act of faith I have ever witnessed. He didn't just give you a safety net, he gave you a throne. The weight of that throne was immense. Elena felt the ghost of her father at her shoulder, not as a tormentor, but as a silent, expectant partner. He had passed the torch to her, a torch she had never asked for and felt wholly unprepared to carry. Could she do this? Could she step into this role? The thought was terrifying. The world of corporate espionage, of boardroom battles and shareholder meetings was alien to her. She was an art curator, a woman who found meaning in beauty and story, not in profit margins and quarterly reports. But then she would feel her son kick, a small, insistent reminder of what was at stake. And she would remember Liam's voice on the phone, dripping with contempt, dead weight, a liability. That memory was the fuel that burned away her fear, leaving behind a cold, determined resolve. She would not let her son be raised by a man who saw his mother as a burden, and she would not let her father's legacy, his secret, desperate act of redemption, be squandered by the very man it had enriched. She began her education in earnest. Guided by Arthur, she started to learn. She devoured books on corporate governance. She studied Innovate Inc.'s financials, its competitors, its market vulnerabilities. She learned the names and histories of every member of the board of directors. She was transforming, shedding the skin of the passive wife, and slowly, painfully, growing into the role of an owner. One afternoon, a thought struck her. She needed to see it for herself. She needed to see the company she owned, not as the CEO's wife at a sanitized holiday party, but as an anonymous observer. She dressed in simple, elegant clothes, a stark contrast to her usual designer wardrobe, tied her hair back, and wore a pair of oversized sunglasses. She took a taxi to the gleaming glass tower in the financial district that served as Innovate Inc.'s global headquarters. Standing across the street, she watched the employees stream in and out of the building. They were young, ambitious, a mix of hopeful energy and corporate anxiety. This was her company. These people's livelihoods, their careers, their futures. They were all in some way tied to her. The realization was sobering. This wasn't just about her and Liam anymore. It was bigger. She entered the lobby, a vast, impersonal space of marble and steel. A massive digital screen displayed the company's soaring stock price next to a larger-than-life, smiling picture of her husband, the man, the myth, the CEO. She felt a surge of nausea. She bought a coffee from the lobby cafe and sat in a corner, watching, listening. She heard snippets of conversation, gossip about the patent deal, complaints about a demanding manager, excitement about a new product launch. It was the living, breathing heart of the empire, and she was a ghost moving through its veins, unseen and unknown. For the first time, the scale of her inheritance felt real, not as a number on a page, but as a living, complex organism, and she was its silent, sleeping queen, about to be awakened. The patent deal was the fulcrum on which Liam's world was balanced, and Elena, from her secret vantage point, watched it begin to tip. With Arthur's help, she had established a secure, anonymous line of communication with Mr. Dubois in Switzerland. Her first official act as the silent majority shareholder was a simple, devastatingly effective one. "Instruct him," she told Arthur, her voice betraying none of the tremor she felt inside, "to table the vote on the acquisition. I want him to express reservations, cite the need for a more thorough risk assessment given the recent market volatility. No, yes, no, no. Just a delay." It was a subtle move, a gentle tap on the brakes, but it sent shockwaves through Innovate Inc. The deal, which Liam had assured the board was a guaranteed victory, was suddenly stalled. The mysterious Swiss majority shareholder, who had always been a reliable rubber stamp, had unexpectedly become an obstacle. The fallout in their home was immediate and volcanic. Liam became a specter of fury and anxiety. He was on the phone constantly, his voice a low, angry growl as he tried to understand the source of the resistance. He couldn't fathom it. The deal was perfect. Why would the primary investor, who stood to gain the most, suddenly get cold feet? It makes no sense, he raged one night, pacing the living room while Elena sat on the sofa, calmly sipping chamomile tea. It has to be a competitor. Someone is whispering in his ear, trying to sabotage us. They're feeding him bad information. Elena watched him, a silent executioner observing her own sentence being carried out. Every ounce of her being screamed to confess, to end the charade. But she knew it wasn't time. The power she held was absolute but fragile. It was rooted in her anonymity. To reveal herself now, in a fit of emotion, would be to lose her strategic advantage. He would see it as a domestic dispute, a wife's hysterical revenge. He would try to manipulate her, to gaslight her, to charm his way out of it. No, when she made her move, it had to be decisive, public, and undeniable. It had to be on her terms in the arena where he felt most powerful. So she played her part. "That sounds awful, darling," she would say, her sympathy a carefully crafted lie. "I'm sure you'll figure it out. You always do." Her feigned passivity was the perfect camouflage. He was so blinded by his own arrogance, so accustomed to her being a decorative presence in his life, that he couldn't see the truth right in front of him. He looked at her and saw his pregnant, emotional wife, completely oblivious to the complexities of his world. He had no idea he was looking at the very saboteur he was hunting. The delay tactic gave Elena the time she needed. She wasn't just the owner, she had to become a leader. Arthur arranged discreet meetings with industry analysts, retired executives, and corporate strategists, all under the guise of managing a private family fund. She absorbed information like a sponge. She learned that the patent deal Liam was so desperate to close was, in fact, far riskier than he had presented to the board. It involved a massive cash outlay that would leave the company heavily leveraged, and the technology they were acquiring was already facing potential challenges from an emerging, more agile competitor. Liam's long-term vision was actually a short-sighted, ego-driven gamble to crush a rival. She also discovered a pattern of behavior. Liam ran Innovate Inc. on a culture of fear. He demanded absolute loyalty, rewarded sycophants, and ruthlessly purged anyone who dared to question his judgment. The company's impressive growth had come at a human cost. High employee turnover, a toxic work environment, and a series of quiet settlements for workplace harassment claims. The beautiful, innovative machine she saw from the outside was rotten at its core. Her father had invested in a vision, but the man executing it was a tyrant. One evening, Liam came home in a state of manic excitement. "I'm going to fly to Geneva," he announced, pouring them both a glass of sparkling water. "I'm going to meet him, Dubois. I'll convince him face to face. He just needs to see the passion, the vision. He can't say no to me in person." Elena's blood ran cold. "Is that wise?" she asked, keeping her voice level. "To go around the board?" "The board works for me. And I work for the shareholders," he scoffed, his arrogance in full bloom. "I'm going to save this deal myself. I'll be gone for a few days. You'll be all right here alone, won't you?" He patted her belly condescendingly. "Just rest. Don't stress yourself out." The moment he was gone, Elena was on the phone with Arthur. "He's trying to go directly to Dubois. We have to stop him." A plan was quickly formed. Arthur contacted Dubois, who, under Elena's instruction, politely but firmly declined the meeting with Liam, citing the trust's strict confidentiality protocols. Liam was stonewalled, his grand gesture of dominance completely thwarted. He was forced to return home, not with a victory, but with a humiliating defeat. His fury when he got back was terrifying. He didn't yell. He was worse. A cold, menacing silence filled the house. He barely looked at Elena, his anger a palpable force in the air. He saw the stalled deal not just as a business problem, but as a personal insult, a challenge to his authority. And he was beginning to suspect the problem wasn't external. He was starting to hunt for a traitor inside his own company. His paranoia fell on Mark, his COO. He called Elena into his office one afternoon. He was on a speakerphone call with his security chief. "I want a full investigation into Mark Thompson," Liam commanded. "Check his emails, his phone records, his financials. He's the only one who knew all the weak points of the deal. He must be the one leaking information to our shareholder." Elena stood by the door, her hand resting on her swollen belly, and listened as her husband gave the order to professionally destroy his best friend. She saw the ruthlessness her father had warned her about, the willingness to sacrifice anyone and anything for the sake of victory. The man she had once loved was a monster, and she was the one who had been feeding him. In that moment, her last lingering thread of affection for him finally snapped. This was no longer just about his insult to her. It was about the company her father had entrusted to her, about the employees whose lives were impacted by his tyranny, about the kind of world she wanted her son to grow up in. Liam wasn't just a bad husband. He was a bad leader, and it was her responsibility, her duty, to stop him. The final board meeting was scheduled for the following Friday. It was time for the ghost in the machine to finally show her face. The boardroom on the 50th floor of the Innovate Incorn Tower was a cathedral of corporate power. A single colossal slab of polished mahogany served as the table, surrounded by imposing leather chairs. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city sprawled below, a toy set for the gods who sat in this room. Today, however, the mood was not godlike. It was funereal. Liam stood at the head of the table, his face a mask of strained confidence. His tailored suit couldn't hide the tension in his shoulders or the dark circles under his eyes. He had spent the last week in a frantic, desperate campaign to save his deal, calling in favors, pressuring board members, and intensifying his witch hunt against his COO, Mark, who sat at the far end of the table looking pale and betrayed. The 7 other board members, a collection of stern, wealthy men and one severe-looking woman, shifted uncomfortably in their seats. They were caught between their loyalty to the CEO, who had made them all rich, and the immovable, mysterious objection of the majority shareholder who held all the real power. "As you know," Liam began, his voice attempting a commanding tone that came out brittle, "we are here to cast the final vote on the acquisition of Omnitech. I have personally addressed the concerns raised by our primary investors' representative. I have provided reams of data confirming the soundness of this deal. This is a pivotal moment for Innovate. A vote of no is a vote for stagnation, a vote for fear." He launched into a passionate, almost manic speech, a final, desperate plea to save his vision, his reputation, his legacy. He spoke of market dominance and synergy, of crushing the competition and securing their future. It was a masterful performance, but Elena, who knew the truth behind the numbers, could see it for what it was, the last roar of a dying king. As he spoke, Elena was in a black town car, moving silently through the city traffic below. She sat in the back, Arthur at her side. She wore a simple, elegant navy blue maternity dress, a color of power and serenity. Her hair was pulled back, her face was set, and in her eyes was a calm that felt centuries old. The nervous, accommodating wife was gone. In her place was the chairwoman. "Are you ready for this, my dear?" Arthur asked gently, his hand covering hers. Elena placed her other hand over her belly, where her son was quietly shifting. "There is no other choice," she said, her voice clear and firm. "He's about to fire Mark for his own failures. I can't let that happen. It ends today." Back in the boardroom, Liam had finished his speech. The air was thick with tension. "Now," he said, clapping his hands together with false finality, "let's proceed with the vote. All in favor of the Omnitech acquisition?" Hands went up one by one, hesitant but obedient. Liam, Mark, and 4 others. A majority of those physically present. "And opposed?" Liam asked, a smirk touching his lips. The severe-looking woman, a shrewd venture capitalist named Catherine, raised her hand. "I'm still not comfortable proceeding without the explicit approval of our majority stakeholder, Liam. Their representative has been clear. They are not ready to approve." Liam's smirk vanished. "Their representative is a cautious Swiss banker who doesn't understand this industry. He is acting on bad information, and I will not let his timidity hamstring this company." He was about to ram the vote through, to claim victory and deal with the consequences later. He was a man cornered, and he was becoming reckless. "That won't be necessary. The voice came from the doorway. It was quiet, but it cut through the tension in the room like a shard of glass. Every head turned. The heavy doors to the boardroom swung silently open, and there stood Elena. For a moment, there was complete, stunned silence. The board members stared, their minds scrambling to process the image. The CEO's pregnant wife, a woman they had only ever seen at holiday parties, a beautiful, silent accessory, was standing at the entrance to their sanctum. Liam's face went through a rapid series of emotions, utter confusion, then irritation at the interruption, then a flash of anger. Elena, what in God's name are you doing here? This is a closed meeting. Security! But before he could say another word, Arthur Vance stepped into the room behind her, carrying a leather briefcase. The older board members recognized him instantly. Arthur Vance was a legend in corporate law, a man of unimpeachable integrity. His presence gave Elena an immediate, unassailable credibility. "There's no need for security, Liam," Arthur said, his voice calm and authoritative. He walked to the table and placed his briefcase on it, clicking it open. "Mrs. Harris is not here as your wife. She is here as your boss." The statement hung in the air, electric and impossible. Liam stared, his mouth slightly agape. A strangled laugh caught in his throat. My what? Arthur, have you gone senile? Elena, this isn't funny. Go home." Elena walked slowly, deliberately into the room. She didn't look at her husband. She looked at the faces of the board members, one by one, making eye contact with each of them. Her gaze was steady, her presence filling the room. When she finally reached the table, she stood opposite Liam, at the other end, the two of them now poles of power. "Hello, everyone," she said, her voice ringing with a confidence no one in that room had ever heard from her before. "For those of you who don't know me, my name is Elena Harris, and I am the beneficial owner of the Blackwood Trust, which holds 55% of the voting shares in this company." Arthur began handing out documents to the stunned board members. Legal papers, trust deeds, stock certificates, the irrefutable proof. Liam's face had gone completely white, the color of bleached bone. He looked from the papers to Arthur and finally to his wife. He saw her then, truly saw her for the first time. The quiet, accommodating woman was gone. In her place was a stranger, a queen who had been living in his house, sleeping in his bed, carrying his child, all while holding his entire world in her hands. The betrayal, the shock, the sheer cosmic humiliation of it all hit him like a physical force. He visibly staggered, gripping the back of his chair for support. "No," he whispered. "No, it's not possible." "My father, Richard Blackwood, was your original angel investor," Elena continued, her voice cool and even, betraying none of the emotion churning inside her. "This was his legacy to me, a legacy you were unknowingly tasked with growing." She finally looked directly at Liam, her eyes locking with his. The hurt, the pain, the rage of the past few weeks were all there, but they were encased in ice. "You were right about one thing, Liam. There is a liability in this company, a reckless, ego-driven liability that is about to drive it off a cliff. But it isn't me." She turned her gaze to the rest of the board. "The vote for the Omnitech acquisition is dead. Effective immediately, I am tabling all major capital expenditures until a full independent audit of this company's finances and management practices can be completed. Furthermore," she took a deep breath, the final killing blow, "I am calling for a new vote, a vote of no confidence in the current CEO." The gasp in the room was audible. Mark stared at her, his expression a mixture of disbelief and dawning, tearful gratitude. Liam looked as if she had just physically stabbed him. The man who called her dead weight was about to be jettisoned from his own ship by her hand alone. The reckoning had arrived. The hours after the boardroom apocalypse were a surreal, disjointed montage of hushed conversations, frantic phone calls, and the quiet, efficient packing of documents. Arthur and Catherine, the venture capitalist who had first voiced opposition, immediately allied with Elena, forming a transitional triumvirate to prevent the company from spiraling into chaos. The other board members, their faces a mixture of fear and newfound respect, quickly fell in line. Power abhors a vacuum, and Elena had filled it with breathtaking speed. Liam had simply vanished. After Elena's final devastating pronouncement, he had stood frozen for a long moment, his face a canvas of utter devastation. Then, without a word, he had turned and walked out of the room, a man already turning into a ghost. Elena didn't return to her house, until well after midnight. Arthur had insisted on sending a private security detail with her, a precaution she had initially dismissed, but now understood was necessary. The world had changed. She was no longer just a private citizen. The house was dark and silent, but she knew he was there. She could feel his presence, a toxic energy that clung to the air. She found him in his office, the room where he had made the deals and taken the calls that had defined their lives. He was sitting in the dark, a single glass of whiskey on the desk in front of him, the bottle nearly empty. He didn't look up when she entered. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating, filled with the ghosts of everything they had once been. "How?" he finally asked, his voice a raw, broken rasp. "How could you do this to me, Elena? To us?" The question was so steeped in his own victimhood that it almost made her laugh. He still didn't get it. He still saw this as a personal betrayal, not the consequence of his own actions. "Us," she repeated, the word tasting like ash in her mouth. "There hasn't been an us for a very long time, Liam. There was you, and there was the woman you allowed to live in your shadow. You just didn't realize it." He stood up then, his movements unsteady. He flicked on a lamp, and she saw his face. It was ravaged. The confident, arrogant CEO was gone, replaced by a hollow-eyed, desperate man. "It was the stress," he pleaded, his voice cracking. "The deal, the pressure. I said things I didn't mean. I never meant to hurt you." "You didn't just say things, Liam," she replied, her voice dangerously quiet. "You believed them. You called me dead weight, a liability. You told your best friend I was a drain on you while I was carrying your son. Do not insult my intelligence by telling me those were just words." He took a step towards her, his hands outstretched. "I can fix this. We can fix this. I love you, Ellie. I'll step down as CEO if that's what you want. I'll take a sabbatical. We'll go away, just the two of us and the baby. We can go back to how things were." It was his final, most pathetic gambit, the appeal to emotion, the attempt to charm and manipulate his way back into control. But the woman he was talking to no longer existed. "Go back?" she asked, a cold, incredulous anger rising in her. "There is no going back. You want to go back to a life where I was your pretty, silent accessory? A life where I arranged your dinner parties and ignored your neglect because I was so grateful you were taking care of me? A life built on a lie, financed by my money, in a company that I own? You didn't take care of me, Liam. I took care of you." Each word was a hammer blow, dismantling the entire foundation of his identity. He flinched, reeling as if she had struck him. "My father," he stammered, his mind finally grasping the enormity of it. "Your father. He gave you all that, and you never said a word." "My father gave me a chance," she corrected him. "A chance to have a life that wasn't dependent on the whims of a man like him, or a man like you. He saw the weakness in me, the same weakness you exploited. He knew I'd seek security in a man's strength, so he gave me a strength of my own and waited for me to be ready to find it. And you, Liam? Your contempt was the final key. You unlocked it." The fight went out of him then. The anger, the pleading, the manipulation. It all evaporated, leaving behind the raw, ugly truth of his ruin. He sank into his chair, his head in his hands, and for the first time since she had known him, he began to sob. They were not tears of remorse, not yet. They were tears of loss, the gut-wrenching sobs of a king who had lost his kingdom, his power, his very sense of self. Elena watched him, and for a fleeting moment, a pang of the old, familiar pity resonated within her. She saw the broken boy inside the arrogant man, the child terrified of failure. But she stamped it out. Pity was what had kept her trapped for so long. She walked over to the desk and placed a single key on the polished wood. "I'm staying at a hotel tonight. I will have the rest of your things packed and sent to you wherever you wish. You have 24 hours to leave my house." He looked up, his face streaked with tears, his eyes full of a disbelief so profound it was almost childlike. "Our home—" "No," she said, her voice final, absolute. "It was always my house. You were just living in it." She turned and walked away, not looking back. She closed the office door on his sobs, on the wreckage of their marriage, on the rubble of the life they had built. As she walked down the long, silent hallway, Her hand instinctively went to her belly. She felt a kick, strong and steady. It felt like a promise. The past was a ruin, but she wasn't looking back. She was walking toward the future, a future she would build herself, on her own terms, from the ground up. 6 months later, the view from the 50th floor office, formerly Liam's, now hers, was the same. But the world had been remade. Autumn had given way to a crisp, bright spring, and Elena, now the mother of a healthy 2-month-old boy named Julian, felt a similar sense of renewal. The office was different. The cold, masculine austerity had been replaced with warmer tones, comfortable furniture, and vibrant, challenging art on the walls. Pieces from the emerging artists she had once championed. She had not taken the title of CEO. She was too wise to believe she could master a role overnight that took others a lifetime to learn. Instead, she had assumed her rightful place as chairwoman of the board. Her first official act had been to reinstate Mark Thompson, not as COO, but as the new CEO. He was a good, decent man who had been liberated from Liam's shadow. Together, they had begun the slow, arduous process of detoxifying Innovate Inc. They implemented new policies on workplace conduct, invested in employee wellness programs, and shifted the company's focus from ruthless growth to sustainable, ethical innovation. The company's stock had taken an initial hit after the dramatic shakeup, but under their steady leadership, it was already beginning to climb back, stronger and more resilient than before. Elena had found that her father had been right about one thing. She did not have the stomach for the kind of world Liam had thrived in, but she had discovered she had something else, the wisdom to build a better one. Her leadership was not about dominance, it was about empowerment. Her quiet strength, her ability to listen, and her innate understanding of human stories proved to be far more valuable assets than a killer instinct. Liam had hit rock bottom, just as she knew he must. The public humiliation, the loss of his job, his wife, and his home had shattered him. For weeks he had been a ghost, hounding her with desperate emails and voicemails that swung wildly between rage and pathetic pleas for forgiveness. She had answered none of them, communicating only through their lawyers. She filed for divorce, her terms generous but firm. He would have a comfortable settlement, more than enough to live on, but he would have no stake in or claim to the company. Then one day the frantic messages stopped. He had retained a new lawyer, a family court specialist, and sent a formal, respectful request to establish paternity and visitation rights for his son. It was the first mature, responsible action he had taken since his world had imploded. He had moved into a modest apartment downtown, a world away from the palatial emptiness of their old life. He had started therapy, a condition Elena's lawyers had insisted upon for any visitation agreement. Friends told her he was a changed man, humbled and quiet. She reserved judgment. Their first meeting since that terrible night was in a neutral location, a private room at a family mediation center. Elena arrived with Julian sleeping soundly in a carrier. When Liam walked in, she was struck by his appearance. He was thinner. The expensive suit was gone, replaced by a simple sweater and jeans. The arrogant fire in his eyes had been extinguished, replaced by a deep, weary sadness. He didn't look at her at first. His eyes went straight to the baby carrier, and a look of profound, painful longing crossed his face. "He's beautiful, Elena," he said, his voice soft. "His name is Julian," she replied, her tone polite but distant. They talked for an hour, with a court-appointed mediator guiding the conversation. They spoke of feeding schedules and nap times, of pediatrician appointments and parenting philosophies. Liam was deferential, attentive, and respectful. He made no excuses for his past behavior. He did not ask for another chance with her. He only asked for a chance to be a father to his son. Near the end of the session, the mediator left them alone for a few minutes. For a long time, neither of them spoke. "I know I'm sorry is meaningless after everything I did," Liam began, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. "But I am. Not just for what I lost, but for what I was. That man, he was a hollow shell. I spent my whole life trying to win, trying to prove I was better than my father, who was just a small-time accountant. I thought the money, the power, that was what made me a man. I had everything, and I had nothing. I never even saw you, Elena. I saw a beautiful wife, a perfect hostess, a symbol of my success. I never saw the brilliant, strong, incredible woman who was standing right next to me the whole time. He finally looked at her, his gaze direct and stripped of all artifice. You saved the company from me, but I think, in a way, you also saved me from myself. You showed me what real strength is. It's not about screaming the loudest in the room. It's about what you've done. It's about building something that lasts. Elena listened. Her heart, which she had guarded so fiercely for so long, felt a faint, unfamiliar stirring. It wasn't love, not the romantic love she once felt for him. That was gone forever. It was something else, a complex mix of sadness for the man he could have been, and a sliver of hope for the man he might yet become, a man her son could one day look up to. She gave a single slow nod. You can see him, Liam. We'll start with supervised visits. We'll see how it goes. A tear finally escaped and traced a path down his cheek. He didn't wipe it away. Thank you, he whispered. They stood, the meeting concluded. They were no longer husband and wife. They were two separate people, bound together forever by the small, sleeping child in the carrier between them. Their old foundation had been built on lies and illusions, and it had crumbled to dust. But here, in the rubble, amidst the pain and the loss, they were taking the first tentative steps toward building something new. Not a palace of glass and steel, but something quieter, more honest, and perhaps, in the end, more durable. A family. The story of Elena and Liam is one of betrayal, empowerment, and the complex, messy path to redemption. It's a story about what happens when the powerless find their voice and the powerful lose their world. Now we turn the final page and ask you, if you were in Elena's shoes, standing in that boardroom with the fate of your husband and your company in your hands, what would you have done?